Inside a single biscuit, a whisper waited, and someone died to hide it. Welcome to Dunkel Senke. I am your host, Thornwick. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from today. Your messages always make this journey richer. Now, let's begin. If you've lived long enough around Nero Wolfe's brownstone, and by that I mean long enough to memorize the creak patterns of the parquet, the hourly moods of Theodore in the plant rooms, and Wolfe's entire catalogue of grunts, you learn to recognize the three categories of visitors who make it past our front door. 1. The honest, who are usually in the wrong building. 2. The guilty, who show up sweating and swearing they aren't. 3. The desperate, who never admit it until Wolfe makes them. At 11:30 on a Wednesday that hadn't promised anything more interesting than an overdue invoice and Fritz's veal ragout, a woman arrived who fit none of those categories. She stood on the stoop holding a small metal tin between both hands like it contained the ashes of someone beloved or volatile, and she had the posture of someone who had rehearsed the act of ringing the bell but might lose her nerve in the performance. Her name, as she announced after stepping inside, was Clara Helming, and the tin in question was a familiar kind, light blue enamel with a white margin around the lid. If you've ever bought artisanal biscuits from a specialty bakery you can't afford, you've seen the type. This one was dented in 2 corners and had a faint smell of cinnamon following it like a nervous chaperone. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, clutching it like she expected me to snatch it. "I need to see Mr. Wolfe immediately." Ordinarily, I respond to that with something reassuring like, "Madame, Nero Wolfe is as accessible as the moon, but go ahead and make a wish." But there was something in her tone, a forced sweetness lacquered over panic, that made me pivot to a different script. I took the tin gently from her hands and gave it a shake. Nothing rattled. It wasn't heavy either. "Food delivery. Wolfe always appreciates tribute." Her face tightened. "It's not biscuits. Well, I'd rather explain it to him." "Suit yourself. But you should know he's neck-deep in orchids right now. Disturbing him before 12 is a capital offense in 7 states. She blinked rapidly. Does he take cases involving blackmail?" I raised an eyebrow. Most people don't start with the word. They tiptoe to it. They try coercion or pressure or complications. They never jump into the pool fully clothed. "Sometimes," I said, "if the blackmailer picks the wrong client, or if Wolfe is bored enough." "Which are you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the tin again as if she'd changed her mind about letting it out of her sight. I didn't let go, because that can make people bolt. "Why don't you sit?" I suggested, guiding her to the red armchair that has hosted its share of unraveling composures. "I'll tell Wolfe someone downstairs is melting." "I'm not melting," she insisted, though her voice trembled like stirred gelatin. "I'm being followed." "By who?" "That's why I need Mr. Wolfe." That was enough to justify interrupting the sacred orchid hour, barely. So I left her hugging the armrests like flotation devices and went upstairs. Wolfe was in the plant rooms, of course, perched on his stool like a sultan presiding over a verdant empire. The orchids around him were in full mid-morning arrogance. The air had the sweet, smug fragrance of blooms that knew they were admired. I announced myself with a throat clear that violated only local etiquette, not federal law. He didn't turn. "Archie, unless your report involves structural fire or Fritz's demise, it can wait. It involves a woman downstairs with a biscuit tin and a claim she's being blackmailed." His shoulders didn't move, but I caught the minute pause in his breathing. Most people would miss it. I've logged enough hours observing him to qualify as a wildlife tracker. "Blackmail," he murmured. "Pfui. The world is overrun with scoundrels who write letters." She also says she's being followed. That concerns the police more than me. Probably, but she brought the tin. Now he did turn, slowly, the way a glacier turns, with inevitability, not haste. What tin? A biscuit tin. No biscuits inside. You opened it? Of course not. I only shook it. I wanted to live until lunchtime. He scowled. Bring her to the office. Not the tin. Her. You don't want the tin? Bring her, he repeated. I headed down, quietly satisfied. Getting Wolfe out of the plant rooms before noon is like convincing a senator to read a bill before voting. The woman must have struck the right nerve. Clara Helming followed me to the office, stepping lightly as if afraid of waking someone. She kept patting her pockets, then clasping her hands, then reaching toward the tin, which I'd placed on Wolfe's desk for dramatic effect. Wolfe was already in the red chair behind the desk, leaning back with his fingertips pressed together like a tent built for contemplating human folly. Sit, he told her, not unkindly. She perched on the edge of the yellow armchair. Mr. Wolfe, thank you. I wasn't sure you would see me. I haven't, he said. Not properly. Not until you explain why you brought that thing into my house. Her eyes darted toward the tin. I didn't want to, but I didn't know where else to take it. Wolfe gave it the sort of look he usually reserves for potted intruders on his orchid's shelf. Madam, he said, I will tolerate many disturbances, some of them even willingly, but I require lucidity. Start from the beginning. She nodded, inhaled sharply, and began. My sister, she said, left it for me. 2 nights ago. A gift? A warning. Wolfe shut his eyes briefly, not in exasperation, yet, but in signal for her to continue. We were supposed to meet for dinner, Clara said. Lydia, my sister, she's older than I am by 7 years, always careful, always punctual. But she didn't show. Instead, when I got home, this was waiting in front of my apartment door. She looked at the tin as if expecting it to interrupt. No note, just the tin. Wolfe opened his eyes. And you opened it? Yes, she swallowed. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded, with a whisper. I frowned. A what? She wrung her hands. That's what Lydia called them. A whisper is what she named her private messages, coded hints, tidbits she didn't trust to say aloud. She was a researcher, you see, at Loring Pharmaceuticals. That perked Wolfe up more than I did before noon. What did the message say? She shook her head. I don't know. Madam, Wolfe said sharply, you just told me it was a message. It was, but someone took it. Well, that escalated quickly. She continued, voice pitching upward. I opened the tin in my apartment. I read the first line, just the first line, before there was a knock on my door. I went to see who it was. No one was there. When I returned, the tin was still on the table, open. But the note was gone. I glanced at Wolfe, expecting a scoff. Instead, he was studying her posture with the focus of a heron watching pond ripples. What was the first line? I asked. She hesitated. It said, the biscuit carries the truth. But the truth is already broken. Wolfe muttered something I couldn't catch. It might have been Bulgarian. And since then, she continued, hands curling, I've been followed. I can't prove it, but I can feel it. Someone wants that message or wants to know what I read. And you want me, Wolfe said, to locate your sister, retrieve the message, and spare you from whatever imbecile shadows you. Yes, she whispered. Wolfe sat silent, considering her like she was a chess piece that had been placed on his board without permission. How long has your sister been missing? He asked. 2 days. Have you gone to the police? No. Her voice cracked, because if this is about her research, Mr. Wolfe, the police might make things worse. Wolfe sighed, a slow, begrudging exhalation that signaled he'd already made a decision he didn't plan on telling me for another 2 hours. Archie, he said, the woman stays here for lunch, and dinner, if necessary. My eyebrows shot up. Hosting people is something Wolfe does only on court orders or threats to his orchid heating system. Clara blinked in shock. I don't need to impose, Mr. Wolfe. You are not imposing, he said. You are contained, until I decide what must be done. He motioned toward the tin with 2 fingers. And that absurd vessel, he added, is not to leave this room. I looked at him. You're taking the case? Perhaps. Or perhaps I am preventing this drivel from inconveniencing me further. He fixed his gaze on Clara. Either way, madam, you will tell me everything you know about Lydia Helming, from her employer to her enemies to her kitchen habits. Archie will record it. I got my notebook. She got a tissue. Wolfe got the gleam in his eye that meant the brownstone had just, ever so slightly, shifted on its axis. And somewhere in the city, I suspected, someone had just made the very poor mistake of disturbing Nero Wolfe's morning. Wolfe didn't dismiss her after the first round of questioning. That alone told me the day had taken an unexpected turn. He kept Clara talking, softly, precisely, and with the kind of coaxing patience he uses only when he suspects a person knows more than they realize. I've seen him do it with botanists, jewel thieves, and once with a visiting senator who had wandered into a lie like it was an unlocked pantry. Clara wasn't lying, but she was holding pieces she didn't know were pieces. By the time the church bells down the block rang noon, we had the rough outline of Lydia Helming's life. A biomedical researcher at Loring Pharmaceuticals, devoted sister, no romantic entanglements, rent-controlled apartment on West 82nd, a mild aversion to dairy, and a resume so spotless it would make a monastery jealous. What we didn't have was any explanation for who might want her whisper, or why they'd helped themselves to it. When Wolfe finally waved her off for a moment of silence, she retreated into the yellow armchair like someone stepping off stage after a taxing monologue. The tin sat untouched on his desk, angled toward him as though waiting for orders. Wolfe stared at it with an expression equal parts irritation and analytical appetite. I dislike objects that enter my home without first being understood, he muttered. You don't say, I replied. Most men are afraid of spiders in tax season. You fear metal containers. That earned me a glare, but only half strength. His mind was somewhere 3 feet above the rest of us. Archie, he said, describe the woman's demeanor when you first saw her. Nervous, but not frantic. Guarded. Determined to keep that tin close. Someone spooked her, but she wasn't flailing. She's not the type to faint artfully. And her recounting of the knock at the door? Straight, I said. If she's inventing, she's either a gifted actress or hasn't realized she's performing. He tapped his fingers twice on the desk. Then someone entered her apartment with remarkable stealth. Or she stepped out longer than she thinks she did. People misjudge time when scared. Wolfe shook his head. No, if she were fabricating or mistaken, the story would sag at the joints. But it does not. Someone wanted the message, but not the vessel. That suggests the tin wasn't their target. Precisely. And yet she carried it all the way here. Curious. Before I could respond, there was a soft shuffle from the hallway. Fritz announcing lunch preparations. Wolfe turned his head slightly. Fritz, he called, set a place in the dining room for Miss Helming. She will join us. Fritz didn't blink. He's accustomed to guests who arrive with mysteries, crimes, financial ruin, and once a python. Compared to that, a missing sister and a haunted pastry container hardly merited a raised eyebrow. Clara started to protest again, but Wolfe shut her down with a raised palm. You require food. A person under duress often forgets to eat. It clouds judgment. And he gets cranky if others are clouded, I added. It disrupts the symmetry. Wolfe ignored that. We all moved to the dining room, Wolfe moving the least, of course. Fritz had outdone himself with a cold poached salmon and a dill dressing that should have had an embassy assigned to it. Clara tried to be polite, but her appetite had gone AWOL. Wolfe, on the other hand, ate with solemn purpose, which always means gears are turning so loudly he needs calories to grease them. Halfway through the meal, he set down his fork. "Miss Helming, when your sister used the term whisper, did she ever elaborate?" Clara hesitated. She said they were breadcrumbs, not in a literal sense, hints that could protect her if something went wrong. "Did something ever go wrong?" "Not until now." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Has anyone from Loring Pharmaceuticals contacted you since Lydia vanished?" "No. And I haven't contacted them," she added quickly. If Lydia was afraid, if she sent a warning, going to her employer felt dangerous. "Reasonable," Wolfe said, "but inconvenient." After lunch, Wolfe instructed Fritz to escort Clara to the front guest room so she could compose herself. Once she was out of earshot, Wolfe let out a deep breath, the kind reserved for problems that refuse to assemble neatly. "Archie," he said, "we must assume the sister's message was of enough value to prompt immediate interception." "Meaning someone was watching her door?" "Yes. The timing is too exact for coincidence. The moment she left the room, the note vanished. That suggests vigilance bordering on obsession. Or professional caution." He inclined his head. "A possibility." I leaned against the doorway. "So what now?" "Now," he said, "you will go to Miss Helming's apartment, inspect for signs of entry, determine whether the watcher left any trace, speak to neighbors discreetly, and bring back any object, however trivial, that may relate to the tin or its missing content." "And the sister want me to try her workplace?" "Not yet. We must locate the pulse before we press the artery." Wolfe's metaphors grow more dramatic when he's annoyed. I didn't comment. "And what about the tin?" I asked. He gave it a thin-lipped look. "It stays here. I will examine it." "You're going to open it?" "No." He settled back in his chair. "Not yet. There's nothing in it. That is what alarms me." And that, in a nutshell, was Nero Wolfe, disturbed not by what a thing contains, but by what it should contain and doesn't. I grabbed my coat. "Right. I'll take a stroll to West 82nd and ask the neighbors if anyone peculiar has been hovering near Clara's welcome mat." Wolfe closed his eyes, signaling dismissal, but just as I reached the door, he added quietly, "Archie, exercise caution." I turned. "Expecting trouble?" "I prefer," he said, "to be unsurprised." The tin glinted on his desk under the afternoon light, an empty vessel with a missing whisper and a man who hated missing pieces more than he hated physical exertion. I stepped out into the city to find the pulse Wolfe wanted. And somewhere in the brownstone behind me, I knew the investigation had already begun without me. The cab ride to West 82nd wasn't long, but it gave me enough time to sift through the details Wolfe had extracted from Clara. Lydia Helming's life didn't ring any obvious alarm bells. No gambling debts, no aggrieved exes, no sudden philosophical pivots into dangerous ideology. But people who lead tidy lives often leave their chaos to someone else to sort out. And it was beginning to look like that someone was positioned squarely at Wolfe's desk. Clara's building was a 4-story brick number with a narrow stoop and a security door that had given up aspiring to security sometime in the early 90s. I buzzed the superintendent, introduced myself as an investigator working on a missing person concern, and got the kind of sigh you associate with landlords who've been sued at least once but not recently enough to reform. "Second floor," he grumbled through the speaker. "Door's open. I'm fixing a pipe." That didn't sound like a man who'd be following anyone through their doorway, but I filed his tone away anyway. People often give themselves away by trying too hard to sound bored. The stairs groaned under me, protesting the intrusion. Lydia's apartment was the second door on the left, and true to the superintendent's promise, or apathy, it was unlocked. I stepped inside carefully, not because I was expecting an ambush, but because Wolfe would give me a 2-hour lecture if I smudged a clue by walking too enthusiastically. The place looked neat. Not staged neat, not ransacked neat, just ordinary. Lived in neat. A stack of mail by the door, a pair of running shoes by the radiator, a bookshelf full of academic journals, and a suspiciously complete Agatha Christie collection. On the coffee table sat a coaster, slightly askew. Coasters always interest me. Wolfe trained me early to notice what people touch without realizing it. I crouched beside the table and looked closely. The coaster had left a faint ring on the wood. Recent. Someone had placed a drink there, and the ring was slightly smudged outward, like a glass had been picked up in a hurry. If that someone was Clara, no surprise. But if it wasn't, I walked to the kitchen. The counters were spotless, except for a plate in the sink with a crumb of something that looked suspiciously like shortbread. Lydia might have enjoyed her snacks, or maybe someone else did while they were waiting to lighten her of her coded whisper. A floorboard near the hallway creaked under my heel, one of those sharp, complaining creaks that's louder than it should be. I stepped back and pressed again. Slower. The board gave more than the others around it. Loose floorboards are either honest construction flaws or dishonest message systems. I knelt and slid my fingers along the edge. The board lifted easily. Beneath it lay a thin plastic envelope. Now, I found all sorts of things under loose boards. Cash, letters, handguns, a truly regrettable love poem. But this envelope held a different kind of treasure. 3 small items. A key card with the Loring Pharmaceuticals logo, a micro SD card, and a handwritten note folded once. The handwriting wasn't Clara's. Lydia, then. I unfolded the note. If something happens, trust no one at Loring, not even the ones who claim concern, and if they come for the whisper, burn it. Well, that certainly added color to the situation. I slid the envelope into my breast pocket, replaced the floorboard, and stood. The air in the apartment felt colder. Not literally, just the kind of cold you get when you realize someone may have been playing cloak and dagger long before you knew there was a game. I checked the bedroom, the closets, the fire escape, and the windows. No sign of forced entry. No sign of struggle. No sign that Lydia packed anything before leaving. In cases like this, the absence of disarray is often the loudest clue. I was heading for the door when a soft thud sounded behind it. Instinct made me step aside. The thud came again, more like a tap this time. Someone on the landing was pretending they weren't standing there. I cracked the door open an inch. The hallway looked empty, but I've learned that people who don't want to be seen often lurk in corners like they're auditioning for the role of shy potted plant. At the far end of the corridor, someone in a dark overcoat was rounding the stairs. Too quickly. I stepped onto the landing. "Hey!" The person didn't turn. The speed picked up, not a run, but the kind of hurry that hopes you'll believe it's normal. I followed to the stairwell in time to see a glimpse of a hat brim disappearing down to the street. By the time I reached the bottom, the front door was swinging shut. Outside, the sidewalk offered up nothing but a slow-moving dog walker and a delivery van. I didn't chase shadows. Wolfe hates that. But I did make a mental note. Someone had been waiting. Someone who wanted to know if Clara, or anyone else, would return for the missing message. And someone who didn't want their face on file. On the cab ride back, I kept one hand over the envelope in my pocket. The tin at Wolfe's office might be empty, but Lydia Helming had left something behind after all. Something she thought was important enough to hide under a floorboard, but not important enough to keep on her at all times. When I stepped into the brownstone, the air smelled faintly of Wolfe's afternoon beer. He was in his office, of course, leaning back with eyelids half lowered in a fake doze that fools no one. "Well?" he asked, without opening them. "I found something," I said, setting the envelope beside the tin. His eyes opened then, not wide, but with the sharpness of a man who knows the board has changed, and someone was watching Lydia's place. He nodded, slowly. as expected. "Wolfe," I said, "this isn't just a missing person case." "No, Archie," he murmured, gaze fixed on the tin and the envelope like twin thorns in his side. "It is not. It appears someone has been whispering louder than they intended." And just like that, the brownstone felt a little smaller, and the city beyond it a little closer. Wolfe had a puzzle with 2 missing pieces, and one of them had just landed neatly on his desk. Wolfe didn't touch the envelope at first. He just stared at it like it had personally offended him by existing. That's his version of a warm welcome. I waited until he lifted a brow, permission granted, and then eased into the chair opposite him. "A floorboard hid it?" he asked. "Loose enough to lift with 2 fingers," I said. "Not concealed by an expert, but not meant to be stumbled on either." Lydia probably assumed Clara wouldn't think to look. She was hiding from someone specific, not from her sister. Wolfe let out a sound that hovered between a grunt and a thoughtful hum. "The key card? Loring Pharmaceuticals. Level 3 access, the kind corporate lawyers pretend doesn't exist." "And the memory card?" "Untested. It could contain anything from her grocery list to the true recipe for Coca-Cola." His lips curved downward. "Archie." "Fine. More likely it holds data she didn't dare keep at the lab." "And the note?" I recited it. He shut his eyes during the last line. Burn it. Like the phrasing personally violated his sense of proper syntax. When I was done, he opened his eyes and glanced toward the tin. The sister urged destruction, and the message was intercepted. That contradiction is intolerable. "You think she wanted Clara to read it and destroy it, not bring it to the police?" "Or to me," Wolfe said. "Which raises the question, did Lydia intend her message for her sister alone? Or did she expect that whoever forced her hand would ensure the whisper traveled further?" That thought hadn't crossed my mind, and I didn't like the shape of it when it arrived. Before I could answer, footsteps sounded at the far end of the hall. Light, cautious, not Fritz. Clara appeared in the doorway, her face drained of color but composed with effort. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes flicking to the envelope. "I couldn't rest. Did you find something?" Wolfe inclined his head. "Your sister left materials concealed in her apartment, evidence that she anticipated peril." Whatever thin thread of hope Clara had been clinging to tightened visibly. She stepped forward, gaze fixed on the envelope like it was the last intact photograph of someone she loved. "Does it say where she went?" "No," Wolfe replied. "But it warns you to trust no one at her workplace. That alone is illuminating." Clara pressed a hand to her throat. I knew she was worried. She mentioned internal politics at Loring, arguments about a clinical project, but she's not dramatic. She never spoke of danger. "People often reserve their fear for paper," Wolfe said quietly, "particularly when they cannot trust those around them." She bowed her head, struggling to steady herself. Wolfe waited, giving her the courtesy of silence. Once she reassembled her composure, he continued. "There is more," he said. "Someone was observing your apartment. Likely the same party who stole the message." Clara's breath caught. "Were they there when—" "Yes," I said. "They were listening, watching, enough so that they moved the second you stepped out." Her hand fell to her side in a slow, defeated gesture. "Then Lydia was right to be afraid." "Yes," Wolfe said. "And if she is alive, she is either hiding from her pursuers or in their custody." She closed her eyes, but no tears fell. This was a woman holding herself together by sheer force of will. "What happens now?" she whispered. Wolfe looked to me. "When he does that, it's not to admire my suit." Archie will examine the memory card. "With precision?" "And the key card?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning you will visit Loring Pharmaceuticals. You will not use the access card. You will observe, inquire discreetly, and ascertain whether Lydia's absence has been noticed or concealed." Clara blinked. Do you think someone there, someone from Loring, might have taken the note? I think, Wolfe said, that your sister believed someone might, and she is more familiar with her environment than I am. I caught her expression, a mixture of dread and dawning comprehension. She was realizing that Lydia's warning wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Clara sank into the yellow chair again, gripping the armrests like a lifeline. Wolfe watched her for a long moment, then addressed me without shifting his gaze. Archie, bring me the tin. I retrieved it from his desk. The enamel glinted softly under the lamplight. Wolfe lifted the lid with the care of a man opening both evidence and insult. Nothing inside, empty as a broken promise. Wolfe tilted it gently, listening. Then he closed it again. This container, he said, is identical to one used by a small artisanal bakery on 64th Street. Miss Helming, did your sister frequent it? Clara nodded. Yes. She loved their cinnamon biscuits. She bought a tin every month. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Then the message came in a vessel she chose deliberately. Not improvised. That matters, she asked. It may matter profoundly. I frowned. How so? Wolfe turned to me. A whisper, Archie, is a hint, but the tin is a context. Lydia wanted her sister to recognize the message's authenticity immediately. Yet the message was taken, leaving behind an item that appears innocuous. I suspect the vessel itself is a clue. You think she hid something else in it? No. His gaze settled on Clara. I think Lydia expected someone to take the message, and so her true signal may lie elsewhere. Clara stared at the tin with new bewilderment. But there's nothing. Not visibly, Wolfe said, but absence too can be crafted. He leaned back, hands resting on the armrests, the posture of a man preparing to siege a castle without standing. Archie, you will tend to the card, then return here. I may have need of Saul Panzer before the day ends. The air shifted. Whenever Wolfe invokes Saul, it means we've left the territory of ordinary trouble. Clara looked between us, fear settling like frost. Do you think my sister planned all this? Wolfe gave her a small, grave nod. I think, he said, that Lydia Helming was sending you a message far larger than a folded sheet of paper, and someone else understood that before you did. And with that, the mystery tightened its grip. Quiet, deliberate, and unmistakably dangerous. Wolfe sent Clara upstairs to rest again, this time with firmer insistence and the kind of tone that leaves no room for argument. She went without protest, moving slowly, like someone carrying worry in both hands. When her footsteps faded above us, Wolfe turned to the envelope again. The memory card sat between his fingertips, a tiny, unassuming speck of plastic that could sink us into more trouble than a suitcase of dynamite. I don't trust you with electronics, he said matter-of-factly, which was his way of saying he didn't trust anyone with electronics except people who studied circuit diagrams recreationally. However, I trust myself less. That's comforting, he grunted. Use your workstation. Do not remove the card from this house, and do not connect that machine to anything that breathes. If the card coughs at me, I'll let you know. He waved a hand, signaling both dismissal and irritation, and I headed upstairs to my room where a modest laptop waited. Something sturdy enough for notes, reports, and the occasional puzzle. Wolfe shoved my way. This time I half expected the card to contain a ransomware manifesto or a pharmaceutical conspiracy written in Comic Sans, but when I inserted it and opened the directory, the contents were simpler and stranger. One file, encrypted, heavily. Not the kind of encryption a hobbyist slaps on their diary. This was corporate-grade, high authority, sign here, here, and here to testify you didn't see this. Encryption. Someone had gone to the trouble of hiding something Lydia didn't trust to remain hidden. I didn't attempt to open it. Wolfe's warning echoed in my ears, and I wasn't eager to plunge the brownstone into digital purgatory. I copied nothing, moved nothing, touched nothing. I only noted the file's name, Biscuit A2final.bin, Biscuit again. Lydia had a theme and someone had interrupted it. I returned to Wolfe with the information. He was sitting with his eyes closed, fingertips pressed together, looking like he was figuring out where to place the dynamite under someone's moral foundation. He listened to my report with a single raised brow. A2 final, he repeated. That suffix implies progression, earlier drafts, earlier versions, a series. Probably at Loring, locked down behind their security. That keycard may grant access to the necessary floor. You told me not to use it. I did, and I meant it. You will not use it until I know what the risk is. I leaned against the desk. Wolfe, this is getting steep. Lydia hid a message, warned her sister not to trust her own workplace, had someone intercept her note within minutes, then left behind an encrypted file she clearly wanted someone else to find, and whoever was watching her apartment is still out there. Yes, he said, which suggests Lydia Helming was not merely fearful. She was preparing a maneuver. And she didn't survive to finish it? That remains to be seen. He opened one eye. Archie, bring me the tin again. I handed it over. He turned it in his hands, examining the enamel, the edges, the underside. Then he tapped it. Hollow spots? No, he said. But this dent. He ran his thumb across the corner, a small irregular crease in the metal. It is inconsistent with the condition of the tin overall. Miss Helming is careful. A dent of this shape suggests it met a hard surface recently. You think someone threw it? No, someone dropped it, in haste or during a confrontation. He set it down gently, as though it might give away more if he didn't scare it. Archie, he said, does the bakery on 64th Street package anything else in these tins? Biscuits, ginger cookies, almond twists. Once a year they do a holiday assortment that would make Fritz reconsider his loyalties. Then Clara recognized it immediately, and Lydia expected her to. She didn't expect someone to steal the message? No, Wolfe said. But she expected someone to try. He stared at the tin for a long moment, and I knew that look, the one that means he's 3 logical steps ahead of the rest of us, and annoyed that the universe hasn't caught up. A knock at the front door interrupted his thinking, soft but deliberate. Wolfe frowned. Fritz is occupied. Archie, see who has come to disturb me now. I went to the hall. The knock came again, and I opened the door to find a man in a charcoal suit, mid-30s, clean-shaven, polite expression carved like it had been sculpted for corporate brochures. Archie Goodwin, he asked. I didn't confirm, but I didn't deny either. My name is Damon Kell. I'm with Loring Pharmaceuticals. He produced a business card like a magician produces a rabbit. I'm looking for Clara Helming. My pulse didn't change. My smile did. Really, I said. And what for? A concern regarding her sister's recent absence. We've been trying to reach Lydia. Clara hasn't answered her phone. I studied his eyes. Clear, calm, controlled, like a man who had rehearsed the right amount of concern without letting it get messy. Wolfe's voice drifted from behind me, deep and unmistakable. Archie, invite the gentleman inside. I stepped aside and let Damon Kell enter. He glanced around the hallway, assessing the brownstone with the curiosity of someone who makes it a habit to catalogue his surroundings. When we reached the office, Wolfe did not stand. He never does. But he did open his eyes fully, which is the equivalent of most men rising and extending a hand. Mr. Kell, Wolfe said, your arrival was inevitable. Sit. Kell sat. He crossed one ankle over the other. Perfect posture, no visible sweat, and no glance at the tin on the desk. Please explain your interest in Ms. Helming, Wolfe said. Kell folded his hands. Lydia called in sick 2 days ago. She has not returned our messages. Clara is her emergency contact. When Clara also became unreachable, we grew concerned. The phrasing was clean. Too clean. Concern doesn't usually come with corporate polish. I watched Wolfe's lip twitch. "Mr. Kell," he said softly, "in this house, precision is valued. Select your next words with care. You're either here to help locate a missing woman, or to inquire whether your company's secrets have escaped their leash." Kell's smile froze, and the room changed temperature. Kell's smile didn't disappear. It just tightened, as if held in place by invisible clips. You could almost see the mental calculation flicker behind his eyes as he assessed how much truth this room could tolerate without tipping into catastrophe. "I assure you," he said finally, voice smooth as a well-ironed lab coat, "our concern is purely for Lydia's well-being. She's a valued member of our research team." Wolfe responded with a non-committal hum that effectively translated to, "I believe none of that, but do continue performing." Kell shifted slightly in his chair, not uncomfortably, just enough to suggest he was adjusting to a less favorable stage. His attention flitted to the envelope on the desk, then back to Wolfe. A trained observer would have missed the glance. Kell had trained himself very well. "Ms. Helming," he continued, "was involved in a sensitive project. It's standard procedure to check on researchers handling confidential material if they disappear unexpectedly." I gave him a polite nod. "And what made Clara unreachable?" His brow creased. "Unreachable?" "Yes. You said you couldn't contact her either." "Oh, yes, that's right." The hesitation was microscopic, but there. "We tried both sisters. Neither responded." "And so," Wolfe drawled, "you chose to come here." "Yes. How did you obtain this address?" Kell's fingers paused mid-interlace. "Just a beat. From Lydia's emergency file, which includes the private residence of her sister's friend and investigator." That earned Wolfe a fractional widening of the eyes from Kell, a tell that he'd missed a step on a staircase he believed he'd memorized. "Perhaps," Wolfe continued, tone softening into something almost indulgent, "you would prefer to begin again, this time without varnish." Kell inhaled slowly, exhaled more slowly, and settled deeper into the chair. "Mr. Wolfe, Loring Pharmaceuticals is under regulatory pressure. Our projects are closely monitored. Lydia was working on a compound with high commercial stakes. If she has vanished, it compromises more than her safety. I was sent to locate her, discreetly." "Sent by whom?" "Our chief scientific officer." "What is their name?" "Dr. Helena Morland." Wolfe's eyelids lowered. "A formidable woman." "You know her?" "I know her reputation." Which, coming from Wolfe, meant he had her pegged to 6 decimal points. Kell went on. "Lydia expressed worries last month about unauthorized access to her research files. She wasn't specific, but she reported it to her departmental head." "And what was done?" I asked. "An internal audit. Nothing suspicious surfaced. But given her absence now, you believe the concerns were real?" Wolfe finished for him. "Yes." Wolfe pressed his fingertips together. "And yet you arrived not at her apartment, but here." Kell hesitated. Not long, not carelessly, just long enough to suggest he was deciding between 2 imperfect choices. "Lydia kept a personal notebook," he said. "She never brought it to the lab. We believe she may have entrusted it to someone outside the company. I thought Clara might know." "She does not," Wolfe said, and Kell's eyes flicked toward me as if hoping I'd contradict the statement. "I didn't." "And you," Wolfe continued, "are concerned that notebook might contain information your company would prefer not to circulate." Kell held still. "It may contain sensitive data, yes." "Or evidence of wrongdoing," Wolfe murmured. "I didn't say that." "No," Wolfe replied. "You didn't." The silence that followed was dense enough to slice. Even the orchids upstairs probably paused their blooming to listen. Then Wolfe shifted his weight, just slightly. But for Wolfe, that's equivalent to a detective leaping onto a tabletop and declaring revelation. "Mr. Kell," he said, "Lydia Helming is missing. This much is certain. She left indicators, messages, concealed objects, suggesting she anticipated danger. Her sister is here under my protection. Therefore, we proceed on the premise that your company is either a participant in or a victim of deceit. Which it is, we shall shortly determine." Kell's posture stiffened. "I hope you're not implying—" "I am not implying," Wolfe cut in. "I am deducing. Implication is a sloppy tool." I cleared my throat. "Before we all get too philosophical, Mr. Kell, what specifically was Lydia working on?" He hesitated again, this one longer. "A formulation," he said at last, "for a new analgesic, a non-opioid compound with rapid effect and minimal side effects." "Valuable," Wolfe murmured. "Extremely. And contentious?" "Yes. Several teams competed for the project. Lydia's group led the findings." Wolfe cracked an eye open. "Competition breeds sabotage." Kell didn't disagree. It was then that the faintest sound reached us, a creak on the upstairs landing. Clara, listening. She'd heard enough. I saw it in her shadow before she stepped into view. Kell rose when she entered, every gesture carefully calibrated to appear respectful. "Miss Helming," he said gently, "I'm very sorry to intrude. We're just trying to understand—" "Mr. Kell," she interrupted softly, "were you aware my sister was frightened? Truly frightened?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "She reported a security concern, yes. But we believed we addressed it." Clara shook her head, a tremor running through her. "No, you didn't. And now she's gone." That hit Kell hard enough to leave a mark. Whether from guilt or strategy, I couldn't yet tell. But Wolfe could. His gaze sharpened, and he shifted the tin slightly on the desk, as though rearranging pieces on a board only he understood. "Mr. Kell," Wolfe said, "one final question. Has anything else gone missing from Loring Pharmaceuticals?" Oh, Kell's jaw tightened. "Yes. 2 days ago. An internal compound inventory flagged a discrepancy." "What compound?" "B27. "And its properties?" Kell hesitated. He weighed. And then he answered. "It enhances neurological receptivity, increases the brain's response to microdoses of targeted agents." I felt the floor drop an inch under us. Because that wasn't a painkiller ingredient. That was a delivery mechanism. Wolfe sat forward, an inch but enough to signal that the temperature of the case had just climbed. "Mr. Kell," he said quietly, "I recommend you contact no one at your company for the next 24 hours. "Why?" "Because someone at Loring Pharmaceuticals," Wolfe said, "has already made the first move. And they are not finished." The silence that followed felt like the moment before a match touches dry timber, and I knew, without needing Wolfe to say it, that the next step would be ours, and dangerous. Kell didn't argue with Wolfe's instruction, but the way he clasped his hands told me he wanted to. He wasn't used to being directed, especially not by a man who hadn't stood up since he entered the room. But the truth has a way of reconfiguring people's posture, and Kell's had shifted noticeably. His gaze drifted toward Clara, and for a moment I wondered if he planned to appeal to her instead. Wolfe sensed it too and cut the notion off with a low, precise growl. "Mr. Kell," he said, "your conversation with Miss Helming is concluded. If further contact becomes necessary, you will request it through Mr. Goodwin." That was my cue to escort Kell to the door. As we stepped into the hallway, Clara retreated a pace, instinctively bracing herself like she expected him to ask something unbearable. He didn't. He kept his polished expression in place all the way to the front door, but just before I opened it, he spoke quietly enough that Wolfe wouldn't hear. "Mr. Goodwin, is she safe here?" "Safer than anywhere else," I said. He nodded once, then added, "If you find Lydia, call me. I want to know she's all right." The tone was sincere. But sincerity doesn't preclude self-interest. It only camouflages it. I watched him walk down the stoop, get into a silver sedan, and pull away without looking back. When I returned to the office, Wolfe's fingers were drumming on the armrest, a bad sign. Wolfe drums only when the facts have aligned in a shape he dislikes but can't ignore. Clara hovered in the doorway again, unsure whether to enter. Wolfe surprised us both by gesturing her in. "Sit," he told her. "I require your impressions." She obeyed, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "Do you trust Mr. Kell?" Clara blinked. "I don't know him well. Lydia mentioned him once. Said he was competent but ambitious. She didn't dislike him." "Competence and ambition," Wolfe said, "are mutually tolerable until placed near sensitive work. Then ambition becomes a hazard." Clara's voice softened. "Do you think he knows where she is?" "No," Wolfe replied. "Mr. Kell is lying, but about something peripheral. He came seeking the notebook, not your sister. His concern is corporate, not personal." Her shoulders slumped a fraction, not from disappointment, but from exhaustion. I could see the fear wearing grooves into her composure. Wolfe observed her for a long moment. Then he said, in a tone gentler than before, "Ms. Helming, Lydia took steps to protect you. Trust in that. Panic will not aid her." Clara exhaled shakily and nodded. When she left the room again, Wolfe's expression changed. Not dramatically, just a subtle tightening around the eyes. "Archie," he said, "we must proceed. Time is compressing." I figured, "What's next?" "You will go to Loring Pharmaceuticals tomorrow morning, quietly. But before that, Saul must be enlisted." "You want him tonight?" "Yes. Now. Call him." I reached for the phone. Wolfe continued speaking while I dialed. "I require surveillance on Mr. Kell, the chief scientific officer, and any personnel directly connected to Lydia's project. Saul will choose his team." When Saul answered, I relayed orders. He accepted without asking unnecessary questions. Saul's way of acknowledging things was serious enough not to trifle with. Wolfe gave a few additional names for Saul to look into, and then the call ended. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half shut, sinking into the kind of concentration that makes oxygen in the room negotiate for space. "You have observed," he said after a pause, "how neatly the pieces arrange themselves." "I wouldn't call this neat," I replied. "Then you're not looking at the same puzzle." He tapped the tin again. Lydia left a message that was immediately stolen. She hid secondary materials someone overlooked. She concealed a file name referencing her own metaphor, Biscuit, and she used a tin her sister would recognize. All deliberate. Meaning what? Meaning Lydia Helming did not panic. She prepared, and she believed her preparations would fall into Clara's hands. Except the message didn't. Wolfe nodded, which suggests Lydia anticipated interception. The whisper was bait. The true content lies elsewhere. Perhaps on the memory card. Perhaps. But I doubt she would put all her trusts in a single medium. Redundancy is a hallmark of intelligent fear. I paced once, twice. "Then what are we missing?" He opened his eyes fully. "The simple question," he said. "Why did she choose a biscuit tin? Why not a letter, a folder, a phone message?" "Because she wanted Clara to know it was from her," I said. "Yes. But also because Lydia expected someone else to look inside and see nothing." The thought hit me like a cold gust. She wanted them to think they got the message. "Correct," Wolfe said. "She wanted her pursuers to believe Clara received the whisper and then lost it. Meanwhile, the real signal is still hidden." "But where?" Wolfe pointed at the tin. "In the tin," I said, "there's nothing." "There is nothing," Wolfe corrected. "That should be there. That is the difference." He pressed the tin toward me with 2 fingers. "Archie, You will take this to the bakery tomorrow before your visit to Loring. You will ask no questions, you will observe everything, and you will note whether this tin is identical to their current stock, or if something inside has been altered, exchanged, or removed. You think Lydia modified it? Or her pursuers did, Wolfe said. Either way, this vessel carried more than a missing message. A sound from upstairs. Light footsteps told us Clara was still awake, pacing her anxiety into the guest room carpet. The air in the brownstone felt taut, stretched thin between fear and strategy. I placed the tin back on Wolfe's desk. "And if someone followed me tomorrow?" I asked. He closed his eyes again. "Then," he murmured, "we will know the game is accelerating." And that, coming from Wolfe, meant the real danger had only begun to show itself. Wolfe sent me off to bed earlier than usual, which is how I knew he intended to stay awake well past a respectable hour. It wasn't the quantity of thinking he needed to do. Wolfe can deduce in his sleep. But the kind of thinking. The kind that requires silence, precision, and having no one in the room to witness the moment he realizes he's ahead of himself. I slept lightly. Too lightly. It wasn't anxiety. I've been shot at, chased, accused, and once had to hold a jar of Wolfe's pickled ramps for an entire hour without sneezing. This was something more like a scent in the air, the knowledge that someone else out there wasn't sleeping at all. By morning, the brownstone had resumed its usual routine. Fritz started breakfast. Theodore fussed upstairs with his orchids. Wolfe appeared in the dining room at precisely 9, wore the same expression he did most mornings, mild disdain for the world, and showed no sign he'd spent half the night mentally pulling threads from Loring Pharmaceuticals. Clara came down late. Her eyes were hollow, but her posture had stiffened into something like resolve. She sat at the far end of the table, barely touching Fritz's croissant, hands clasped as though they were the last familiar things she could hold. Wolfe gave her a quick glance, enough to confirm she was physically intact, and then turned to me. "You will leave as soon as you finish eating. The bakery first, Loring afterward. Any particular order for the day's sins?" "Do not jest," he murmured. "This requires care." Clara set her cup down. "Mr. Wolfe, please, if you learn anything today, anything at all, tell me immediately." "You will be informed," he said, "to the extent that information aids your safety." She frowned. "That sounds like a limitation." "It is." That conversation could have curdled the cream, so I stepped in. "Clara, Wolfe isn't withholding. He's rationing. Right now, too much information could get you hurt." That steadied her. Not much, but enough to keep her from spiraling before I left the house. She watched me put on my coat like she expected the door to swallow me. And honestly, I wasn't sure it wouldn't. Wolfe stopped me in the office before I could head out. "Archie." I turned. "If you are followed, do not confront, do not evade. Let them observe you, but do not lead them back here. You want me to go sightseeing until they get bored?" "I want you," Wolfe said, "to behave normally. That will unsettle them far more." "Understood. And one more thing." He leaned back, fingers nesting together. "Do not underestimate the bakery." That one gave me a pause. "The bakery?" "Yes. It may offer the first tangible proof of what Lydia concealed." I nodded and left. It was a cold morning, the kind where your breath fogs before your suspicions do. I took a cab to avoid shaking off any possible tales prematurely. If someone wanted to follow me, they'd have to do it creatively. The bakery on 64th was a narrow storefront with pastel lettering and an awning that tried too hard. Inside, the air smelled like cinnamon, butter, and the kind of artisanal ambition that makes people charge $12 for a cookie. A young woman behind the counter perked up when I entered. "Good morning. Looking for anything special today?" I placed the tin on the counter. "I need to know if you still sell these. And if this one looks like your recent stock." Her cheerful expression shifted into confusion. She picked up the tin, turning it over in her hands. "Well, we sell this model, yes. But the bottom stamp here," she pointed. "This year's tins use a new batch code. This one's older." "How old?" 6 months, maybe 8. We switched vendors." "Anything unusual about it?" She shook her head. "Standard enamel tin, except this dent." She tapped the corner. "These older tins dented easily. The new ones don't." I leaned in. "Do customers ever bring them back? Refill them?" "Yes, sometimes. We offer a discount." "Did Lydia Helming ever bring hers back?" She froze. "You know Lydia?" "Slightly. She came in a few times," the clerk said slowly. "She always bought the cinnamon biscuits. Sometimes she'd bring the old tin to refill. Last month she brought this style, but what?" She seemed nervous. She checked the door twice before leaving. That clicked neatly into Wolfe's deductions, like the last bead in a string. "You wouldn't happen to remember if she said anything?" "No," the clerk said. "Nothing. She just looked scared. And she kept touching the tin like it mattered more than what was inside it." That was enough for Wolfe. It was more than enough for me. I thanked her and stepped out. Someone was waiting across the street. He pretended to read a newspaper. Honestly, nobody reads one of those in print unless they're hiding behind it. But he held it wrong. Too stiff, too high. And when a cab honked behind him, he didn't flinch. A professional. I walked. He waited a beat, then folded the paper and fell into step a half-block behind. I didn't speed up. Wolfe's instructions held. Behave normally. So I moved at a city walker's pace, paused at a crosswalk, checked a shop window reflection. He followed. Not subtle, not sloppy. Just consistent. When I reached 5th Avenue, I hailed a cab. He tried to hail one too. Too late. Mine pulled away first. I took a roundabout path toward Loring Pharmaceuticals, switching cabs twice. Not to lose him entirely, but to see if he'd persist. He did. New cab. Same distance. Same pace. Whoever was tailing me wanted to know where I was going far more than they wanted me stopped. That was useful information. By the time I reached the corporate facade of Loring Pharmaceuticals, a gleaming glass slab with the personality of a frozen handshake, I knew the man behind me was still watching. I didn't look at him, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge. I walked through the front doors and smiled at the receptionist. "I'm here to ask a few questions," I told her. "About Lydia Helming." Her reaction was immediate. Startled, guarded, a flicker of something like alarm. "Lydia," she said. "She isn't in today." "I know," I said. "That's the problem." Behind me, the glass doors reflected the sidewalk. The newspaper man had stopped outside, watching. And that was when I knew, whatever Lydia had uncovered, whatever she had whispered into that missing note, her enemies weren't just tracking her. They were tracking anyone who tried to find her. The receptionist's eyes flicked to the glass behind me, confirming she saw the man outside or saw enough to understand someone had followed me here. She drew her shoulders inward, not quite recoiling but bracing in a way that said she understood more about the situation than she intended to reveal. "Mr.?" she prompted, hands poised over her keyboard. "Goodwin, Archie Goodwin." "And you're here regarding Lydia?" "Yes, discreetly, if that can be managed." Her throat worked as she swallowed. "You're not with Loring?" "No," I said. "But someone who is, or claims to be, is already involved. I'm just trying to locate a missing woman." The receptionist absorbed that with a flickering uncertainty, the kind people exhibit when a situation bumps into their internal list of things that shouldn't be happening in the lobby. She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Let me check with HR," she said. "Please wait here." She walked toward a back hallway, too quickly, too nervously, and vanished behind a frosted glass door. I remained at the counter, hands in my pockets, eyes drifting upward at a tasteful LED screen showing a promotional video. Animated molecules danced across a digital bloodstream, promising a safer, faster future. The usual corporate optimism, bright colors painted over dark corners. I didn't turn toward the glass behind me, but the reflection told the whole story. The man trailing me had taken up a casual post by the corner of the building, adopting a posture identical to the many office workers pretending to check their phones. Except his phone never lit up. In our line of work, you don't need to see a face to spot danger. You only need to see the absence of natural behavior. The receptionist returned less than a minute later, fast enough to be suspicious. "Someone will speak with you," she said. "Please go to conference room 4B, down the hall, first right." The tone was clipped, practiced, and wrong. "Thanks," I said. The hallway stretched long and quiet, lit by overhead LEDs so white they bordered on sterile. Offices on either side had tinted glass fronts, the shadowy outlines of lab equipment and people in white coats visible through the opacity. The place had the atmosphere of a well-funded research temple, where everyone walked precisely enough to leave no trace. Conference room 4B was at the end of the hall. I opened the door. Empty. Not vaguely empty, deliberately empty. Too neat. No chairs pulled back from the table, no stray notepads. Nothing to indicate the room had been used since it was cleaned that morning. I stood at the threshold for a long second, then stepped inside because Wolfe would have demanded proof, not intuition. The door clicked behind me. Not loudly, just with the soft, final efficiency of an airlock sealing. I didn't turn immediately, but I felt the presence before I saw him. The same man from the sidewalk. No newspaper now. He stood just inside the doorway, blocking the exit with the kind of stillness that belongs to trained personnel. "Good morning, Mr. Goodwin," he said. His voice was low, pleasant and professional, the triple threat of a hired operative. "Morning," I said. "You lost your paper." His lips twitched. "I won't need it in here." "Well, that's a relief. I'd hate to watch you struggle with the crossword." He didn't rise to the bait. Professionals rarely do. He stepped inside fully, closing the door behind him with a touch that suggested muscle held carefully in reserve. "You're asking questions about Lydia Helming," he said. "That's unfortunate." "You've got a different word in mind," I told him. "Try using the honest one." He ignored that. "You shouldn't be here. Yet here I am. Funny how doors work. You're interfering." That's one interpretation. I leaned against the table, keeping my hands loose. Another is that people who tail me usually have something to hide. His eyes narrowed. A precise, measuring expression. "You shouldn't involve yourself in matters you don't understand." Lucky for me, I enjoy learning. "You're being watched," he said calmly. "Your movements, your associations, your conversations. This is your one opportunity to step aside." That sounds like a warning. "It is." "Well," I said, "that's the problem. I don't take warnings from strangers, especially ones who stalk bakeries." Something flickered across his face. Recognition, annoyance, maybe both. "You were expected to go to Loring," he said, "but not to the bakery first." That told me more than anything else he'd said. "You've been following Clara too." He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Before I could press further, the door opened again. Not forcefully, but with a briskness that belonged to someone accustomed to authority. A woman entered, tall, silver hair in a tight bun, a tailored charcoal suit, and the kind of posture that suggested she could bend steel by frowning at it. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "I'm Dr. Helena Morland." "Ah, the chief scientific officer." Wolfe had pegged her reputation correctly. She dismissed the operative with a slight tilt of her head. He obeyed instantly, stepping back and closing the door as silently as he had before. Dr. Morland walked to the table, placing a folder on it without offering me a seat. "I understand you're conducting private inquiries into one of our senior researchers," she said. "That is problematic." "No," I said. "What's problematic is that your staff are following people instead of answering questions." Her jaw tightened. Not in anger, but irritation at inefficiency. "Mr. Goodwin, Lydia Helming was working on something exceedingly sensitive. Sensitive enough that her disappearance has triggered several internal alarms. We are attempting to manage a volatile situation." "Volatile," I echoed. "That's one word. Another is criminal." Her eyes sharpened. She closed the folder. "What do you know?" "Enough to make you uncomfortable," I said, "and not enough to trust you." She exhaled, a controlled, measured breath. "Then let me be direct. Lydia was in danger, real danger. And if she contacted her sister, if she left anything behind, then you are already entangled in something far beyond the scope of a private investigation. I've noticed. And you should tell me," she said, "exactly what Lydia left behind." I smiled. Not warmly. "Dr. Morland, the only person I answer to is Nero Wolfe." Her lips tightened in something resembling respect and frustration. "You're making a mistake." Before I could respond, the door burst open, not violently but abruptly enough to silence the room. It was the receptionist. Her face was pale. "Dr. Morland," she gasped, "there's been a breach on floor 3. Security found—" She stopped when she saw me. Morland's eyes hardened. "What did they find?" she demanded. The receptionist swallowed. "Lydia Helming's access card was used 20 minutes ago." Morland turned to me sharply. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "it seems your missing woman may not be missing at all." Except she didn't sound relieved. She sounded afraid. I've seen people go pale before. Crooks, swindlers, jealous husbands. But the receptionist's shade of white suggested a different fear. Dr. Morland didn't waste time. She strode past the woman and into the hallway, heels cracking like gunshots. I kept pace. My tail was nowhere in sight, which meant he'd either been reassigned or had reblended into the building's wallpaper. Floor 3 required an access badge. Morland's got us through. The corridor buzzed with quiet urgency. Low conversations behind glass, staff moving briskly without meeting each other's eyes. Corporate panic is easy to spot. Everyone pretends nothing is wrong at twice their normal speed. We reached a security console where 2 guards hovered over a screen. Morland demanded, "Show me." The guard tapped a key and a video clip played. A timestamp, a side door, a figure swiping an access card. The face was blurred, but the gesture, the tilt of the head, the quick survey of surroundings. It wasn't Lydia. No, it was someone shorter, narrower, moving with nervous urgency. It was Clara. Not possible. Not from what I'd seen. Clara had been at the brownstone when this swipe occurred, unless I'd hallucinated an entire breakfast and her pale worry over Fritz's croissants. But the figure, coat, hair, posture, it was Clara's twin or a deliberate imitation. Morland turned to me sharply. "This is your doing." "Not unless I can be in 2 places at once. You brought her information. You pushed her into taking action." "She was under Wolfe's roof," I snapped back. "She didn't leave." Morland froze mid-retort. Something clicked behind her eyes. Not realization. Recognition. She knew something, and Wolfe had suspected she would. "I'm leaving," I said. "Wolfe needs to know this immediately. You're not going anywhere unless—" But I was already moving, and I didn't bother using the elevator. You learn early in this line of work, elevators slow down when you need them most. I took the stairs, burst out onto the street, and hailed the first cab I saw. As we pulled away, I checked the reflection in the window. No tail. Either I'd shaken him, or something more interesting had him preoccupied. By the time I reached the brownstone, Fritz had opened the door before I knocked. "Mr. Wolfe is expecting you," he said with a solemnity that made me wonder if the orchids had briefed him telepathically. I went straight to the office. Wolfe sat rigidly, still as a statue, but his eyes were alight, glinting with that cold fire he reserves for moments when the truth finally arranges itself into a shape only he could predict. Clara sat opposite him, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked exhausted but intact, not recently escaped from a pharmaceutical caper, not on the run. She looked up at me, confused. "Archie, what's wrong?" Wolfe spoke before I could. "Tell me," he said. I did, as succinctly as possible. Wolfe listened without blinking. When I finished, the room felt like the inhale before a storm. Clara shook her head, frantically. "That wasn't me. I swear it. I've been here all morning." "Indeed," Wolfe said calmly. "And that is the first reassuring fact of the day." She stared at him. "First?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "because it confirms my suspicion that the person who used your sister's badge intended to impersonate you." "Impersonate me?" Clara repeated, throat tightening. "Yes," Wolfe said, "to draw attention or to distract from their true objective." He shifted his weight forward, a movement as rare as a lunar eclipse. "Archie, bring me the tin." I retrieved it from his desk. "Clara," Wolfe said, "your sister frequented the bakery not for biscuits, but because their tins were identical and replaced seasonally. Lydia bought a new tin last month, yet the one you brought us is an older model, from 6 to 8 months ago." Clara blinked, "But she left it for me." "No," Wolfe said. "Someone else left it. Lydia's real tin never reached you." The realization hit her like a physical blow. "The dent," Wolfe continued, tapping the tin, "is fresh. Your sister was careful. She would not have given you a damaged tin unless forced, but the tin itself was not damaged long enough to show wear along the crease. Meaning, someone dented it recently, after replacing whatever Lydia originally placed inside. She left you something," Wolfe said, "but you did not receive it." Clara's voice trembled. "Then what did she mean for me to find?" Wolfe pointed at the memory card on his desk. "This was the decoy. What Lydia wanted you to find was on her person when she disappeared." "But then how?" "Because," Wolfe said, "someone else found it first." He drew a breath, heavy and final. "Your sister trusted someone at Loring, someone she confided in, someone who knew your habits, your appearance, your proximity, someone who could imitate you convincingly on camera." My jaw tightened. I knew where he was headed. Clara knew it too. She shook her head violently. No, she wouldn't." Wolfe's voice softened. "Yes, Damon Kell." Clara gasped. Wolfe continued, gentler but unyielding. "Kell stole the real whisper. He planted an old tin with nothing inside, knowing the emptiness would suggest Lydia had hidden her message poorly, or not at all. He impersonated you at Loring to erase evidence or retrieve the remaining thread." Clara covered her mouth. "He feared Lydia's note contained proof of his sabotage," Wolfe said. "He wanted Clara panicked, isolated, and easily observed." I exhaled hard. "And the missing compound?" "Part of his scheme," Wolfe said. "Kell stole it. Lydia discovered it. He intercepted her and the real message she intended for Clara." Clara whispered, "Is she alive?" Wolfe didn't answer immediately. His eyes dropped to the tin. "I believe," he said slowly, "that Lydia left a breadcrumb Kell overlooked. A faint chime interrupted us. The doorbell. I went to the hall. A figure stood outside, trembling, clutching a battered tin, the newer model, the one from last month. It was Lydia Helming, alive. Barely. When she collapsed into my arms, her first words were a whisper. "Clara, the tin, the real one." We brought her inside. Wolfe stayed seated, but the satisfaction in his eyes was unmistakable. Justice had arrived at his doorstep, dented but intact. Later, after the police took Kell away, after Lydia was safely in a hospital, after Fritz served a restorative dinner, Wolfe leaned back and declared the final verdict. "Human folly," he said, "is rarely in the crime itself. It is in the belief that deceit can outrun truth." I nodded. "And Biscuit's help?" He snorted. "Phooey. A biscuit is merely a vessel. It is the human mind that betrays, or redeems." Clara smiled through tears. Lydia would recover. Kell would not, and the brownstone returned to its quiet, orderly universe, where truths eventually surface, villains falter, and Nero Wolfe, immovable as ever, solves the unsolvable without standing up once. 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 Standing up